You guys might have seen this old tractor in a couple other videos. This is a 1980 Cub Cadet 782, what I would consider one of the last great garden tractors made by International Harvester. After that, the Cub Cadet line was sold to MTD and things kind of went downhill from there. So it's really worth putting some money into this thing to keep it running right. The Achilles heel of this model was really the Kohler KT17 engine that was in it. It didn't have a pressurized oiling system. It was kind of designed for things like generators, water pumps, things that didn't have to go on steep angles. Well, if you take this thing on a steep angle, like mowing on a hillside, it can become oil starved and ruin the engine in short order. This one's burning oil. It's driving me nuts, so I've decided, well, I originally thought maybe I'd rebuild it, but from what I can tell, it's really just not worth putting any real money into this engine. So what I'm gonna be doing is repowering it with a brand new Briggs and Stratton Vanguard 18 horsepower. And it's gonna be probably a lot quieter. It's gonna run a lot smoother. It's gonna sip fuel. This thing's a gas guzzler and it's not gonna burn oil. I'm not gonna come in smelling like smoke and I'm not gonna be huffing all that, those oil fumes while I'm out there mowing the lawn. So let's go ahead, let's get started, and I'll show you how to do this. I've already got the battery unhooked. I don't need any unnecessarily sparks when I get that big starter wire and stuff. So it's a good idea just to unhook the ground side of the battery. And then I'm gonna go ahead and take the side panels off, which is just wing nut on each side and a spring on the front here. Now I'm gonna go ahead and shut off the fuel petcock right underneath the gas tank here. One major tip is put a sign that says add oil somewhere, you know, preventing you from starting the tractor, because these things are shipped without oil. So now we'll go ahead and unplug the headlights. And I'm gonna shut the hood so the thing doesn't completely fall apart on me here when I take it apart. This front grille is attached by a few 5/16 bolts, but they have a 12-point head on them, so you're gonna need a 12-point socket to take those off. Now, if I took this apart with the hood open, as soon as I took this off, it would probably try to fall over on me. This should pop right off. Will it come off or did I forget something? We'll see here. Oh, there's a little spring on the grill I forgot, so we'll get that. So there's going to be a few basically cables, fuel line, electrical connector. We'll kind of go through and systematically kind of pop all that stuff off. You see I'm working right by this pole. You'd think, man, what an idiot. But I've got a spot to put a hoist right above me here. So once I get this thing loose, I'll pull the engine out with my little chain hoist. Now we'll just loosen the little bracket that holds the choke cable on. This is going to be 1/4 inch. And while you have your 1/4 inch out, we'll pop the throttle cable off its little hook here. This we will not be reusing. It's gonna be a little bit too short for that new engine. The engine kit that I bought, I got it from a small engine warehouse. So that way it comes with all the adapters you need. It should be really, really quick. Probably save a little bit of money by kind of rigging it up yourself, but it's not gonna look as nice. And it's gonna take a lot more time. And you know, sometimes it's worth just spending a few extra bucks. I'm gonna make this, I think, easier on myself. So rather than removing the actual engine mount bolts, I'm gonna actually remove the whole plate that the engine goes on. It's just a lot more accessible. So that's gonna come off with 4 9/16 bolts. And you don't have to get on the other side of those. There's not a nut. It's actually, well, the nut that is on it is welded to the plate. So that just makes it way, way easier, because to get the actual engine off the plate, there is a nut on each one of those 4 engine mounts, and you just cannot get in there. We'll get these 4 off, and then there's one more thing I think we'll have to take off, and we can lift this thing up and out. It's always like 25% harder when you're holding the camera with one hand. So I lied. There's actually 6 bolts that we have to take off here. And the ones, you'll know they're the ones you have to take off because they're right on the frame. They're on the frame rails. So these ones over here in the middle are actually your motor mounts, and those are the ones that are gonna spin if you can't get a wrench on the other side, which like I said, you're really gonna struggle to get a wrench on the other side. So 3 on each side. The front one is right on the front axle, right above it. I may have to jack it up just a couple inches so I can lean the front axle to get this one out. We'll see. Nine 9/16 inch. All right, so I can get those out without jacking it up. And now we're gonna go in here to the drive shaft. And let me see which ones I gotta take off. So I'm gonna take off these ones, which will disconnect it from the engine side. These are 9/16, just like about everything else on this tractor. This kind of joint is called a rag joint. So it's kind of like a universal joint, but it is for very minimal amounts of angle change. So this can kind of, this rubber disc can kind of flex as it needs to. And just kind of also kind of isolate the vibration between the shaft and the engine. All right, now I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect my fuel line. If you've recently painted your tractor, just be really careful you don't get any gas on your paint. A lot of these fresh paints, especially if they're an enamel, can really get wrecked by gas, especially when they've been recently painted. So now it should lift out. The only thing stopping me are the starter, the wire on the starter terminal here. But that's gonna be a lot easier to get out once I lift it a couple inches, so I'll do that first. These engines are not too heavy, but I'll save my back and use a hoist here. And always, whenever you're pulling an engine out like this, just kind of look around it, make sure there's no wires or anything that you missed, so you don't yank them right off. So there we go, it's free. I'll roll the tractor out of the way here. So while this is up in the air, I'm going to remove the engine mount, or the engine plate, basically, from the engine here. It's a lot easier to get the wrench on the nut. And these are 9/16, once again, as always. And this thing never really dripped oil on the ground, but there sure is a lot of greasy oiliness under here. So I think in addition to, you know, the little bit of smoking it was doing, it was probably dripping a little bit, probably out of the front seal. Before we install the new engine, we've got a couple things we've got to transfer over. One being the adapter here for the drive shaft. So these are 3/8 inch bolts. This kit has a little container of Loctite, and this is one place where I'm going to use that. Make sure your carriage bolts are in before you install this, because you might not be able to get them in once it's all put together here. And you can see here there's a hole and a hole, so you can align the heads of your carriage bolts. Now we're going to remove the PTO clutch off the old engine. I suspect I may have to take the muffler off, but we'll see. These are 5/16 on the bottom. And on the top they're 11/16. And I have to remove this whole plate, not just the clutch assembly itself. And then the bolt on the end of the crankshaft is 5/8 also. And I'm going to make my life a little bit easier and take this apart in a couple pieces. These are 9/16. I'll set this all back together the way it came out so I can, remember how it all goes here. I'm going to take part of my fan shroud off here, just make it a little bit easier. To get the bigger impact. Now we'll install the clutch onto the Briggs and Stratton engine. It says to reuse the washer off the old engine, but this sure looks like a brand new washer. So I'm thinking that is a little bit of an outdated instruction. So before I snug this up, I'm going to try to center it a little bit better in here, because you can see these are a little bit oversized holes, so it'll sit a little bit low. There we go. Alright, I think I'm going to take off one of those brass washers, because right now the way it is, my bolt at the end isn't even touching. Alright, I pulled one of these brass spacers out. I had to take this thing off to do it. You may be better off starting with two if that's what it turns out is the right thing to do here, because they are really, really hard to get off if this thing's put together. Alright, that's a little bit better. Now I'm going to go ahead and put my key in here. On the end here, I'm not gonna use the supplied washer, so I am gonna do what they say in the instructions. And then I'm also, instead of using the lock washer, I'm gonna go ahead and use some Loctite, because I'm just not happy with the amount of thread engagement that I have here, and I definitely don't want to pull out those threads there. And if I use the bigger washer, it looks like it could be kind of rubbing on the bearing a little bit there, so I didn't like that either.
This is 9/16. I'll put a big screwdriver on the other side of the engine to stop it from spinning. I really wish they supplied a longer bolt here. This is just not great. I may end up ultimately looking for one to replace it. I'll have to figure out what that thread is. Now I can install the springs and this cover plate so I can set the clutch depth. And they supply a feeler gauge to do that. And I'm just working the feeler. I basically just adjusted this until the feeler slides in and out freely, but it's a little bit kind of like a little snug when it slides in and out. This one might be able to come out just a hair. Yep, that should be pretty good. And it's gonna feel like it's rubbing, but it's really just rubbing on this plate, this front cover that helps hold everything back. So I think one more thing, I'm just gonna pop off the starting terminal and wire here. I ultimately ended up crimping together a piece of 6 gauge onto what was already here, so it'll be a little bit cleaner. I'm not sure exactly what they expected you to do with this terminal, because the factory terminal certainly won't reach all the way over here. So I'll just pop this off and I'll put it in and we'll go from there. First of all, I'll say everything is much more accessible on this new engine. I can get right to all these motor mounts, so I can adjust it and get it all pushed into the drive shaft. And it's not too heavy, so I can kind of push it around a little bit here. I've just got my mounting plate just on there kind of loose right now. There we go. Drive shaft is in. Let's see how we're doing on all these holes. Looks pretty good. Wow, that fits nice. So I think what I'm going to do is I'll get my red original plate, mounting plate, snug down here, and then I will kind of just check the engine alignment and everything visually, and then we'll snug down these, the Briggs and Stratton motor mounts. There we go. And then we'll snug down the drive shaft. That'll allow me to kind of keep an eye on that and make sure that's all kind of lined up without me forcing it into alignment. That fits like a glove. It fits perfect. The starter solenoid, or the starter power wire, is much more accessible here than it was on the previous motor. So here's a look at the motor mounts. And I think what I'm gonna do is push it all the way to the left side of the tractor here. These all have little slots on them. And that should keep things a little bit more centered. I would say very close to centered. I wanted to make sure I had room to get this oil filter off. I may just check that before I fully commit to my engine placement here, but I think I will be able to. Now with it all the way left, I'll push it back a little bit. Make sure my rag joint can go here. I don't want these bolt heads on my rag joint hitting anything, so I want probably the bottom to be kind of just a little bit, you know, kind of pulled in versus kind of pushing it all in together. So we'll see, I'll kind of visually line this up and then I'll snug these down. All right, one thing I already don't like is if you look at this, I really, I think I ought to put a washer on top of this. I don't like how this is kind of halfway over that slot there. So I'm gonna get some washers for all these and then I'll snug them all down. I'm gonna go ahead and reroute the fuel line where the throttle cable used to come through. And another super kind of annoying thing is if this fuel line was like 2 inches longer, it would be perfect for that. Luckily I have some fuel line around, so I'll just cut a piece and replace this piece. But that would have been nice if that was a little bit longer. So here's what I did for the fuel line. I just went through this whole, the throttle cable. It's not, you know, too tight of a bend here. Keeps everything kind of happy. And then for the starter wire, I just tied it to these other wires, which it's okay. They're tied together for the whole length of the frame anyways. I ended up putting a little rubber holder thing here. That's probably not necessary, but it relieves a little bit of strain. And then I just crimped a new end on it. You may be able to work with the cable that they gave you. This one, you'd probably have to go underneath to make that work, rather than kind of up and over like I did here. So it's up to you, but just know you'll probably have to do a little something here. I'd hesitate to put like a bolt and a nut on here to tie the two cables together, but it's probably what they're thinking people are gonna do. I don't know. Right now, I've just got this oil drain just kind of zip tied here. We'll see what I end up doing with that. I don't love that spot. So if anybody has any better ideas than that, I just don't want this to rub, you know, then let me know. Got my PTO clutch hooked back up here. I've plugged in the main harness. That plugged in nicely. They've got that nice adapter. And then now I'm just gonna go ahead and hook up the choke wire. So right now the choke is off, so the wire is fully extended. And with the choke on, the wire is fully in. So what I'll do is hook it up. I don't know if I'm gonna hook it to the top or the bottom here. I think I'll hook it in like this. All right, so the choke I've hooked through the top. To get it to the bottom just didn't seem reasonable. And I think that's gonna work out pretty good. And then I will just clamp it down. I put it on the outermost. Let's see how that works as far as travel goes. So let's see here. It looks like that travel is gonna work well. If I put that on the furthest outward one. So I'll clamp that down. And now I'll just remove the throttle cable and then give you a whole new lever with this kit, so hopefully I can make my old handle work, but we'll see. All right, I'm just about done. I did some debugging while the camera was off here. Once I got everything hooked up, I got the starter wire hooked up, throttle cable here, which this cable is not the greatest. Be super careful not to over clamp right here, or it'll just completely bind up. The choke, so everything's essentially hooked up, but when I went to start it, nothing happened. It just barely clicked, and I was suspecting that could happen, and the reason being is the previous engine was grounded to the frame, essentially. So this plate was bolted to the frame, the engine was bolted to that plate. Well, now the new engine is bolted to a plate that is painted. It basically adds one more layer between the engine and the frame, which the battery is grounded to the frame. So I took a 6-gauge cable and grounded to this bolt here, which you could pick any one of these engine mount bolts. I figured those would be pretty safe to pick. Ideally, you would put this cable on before you mounted everything, because it's really hard to get up underneath it. I had to get in, get a wrench in from the old oil drain hole. And then I grounded that to this beam, this like tower here. It was basically the best bolt I could find that went pretty securely directly into the frame with nothing else. There's a little ground here. This just seems a little too, just not quite big enough for what I really wanted, which is, you know, to ground it when the starter is starting. But it started right up. I'm just gonna go through and put the covers and everything on, and then we'll fire it up and we'll show you.
I still was just not happy at all with the way the throttle cable was run with that big long 4-foot cable. So I cut about 2 feet off the cable and realized that I had a much shorter and straighter path if I brought it in from the right side of the engine. So I drilled a hole right below where I had my fuel line running, and was able to use the same clamp but just mount it to a second clamping spot that Briggs and Stratton provided just to the right of the throttle kind of linkage there. That worked way better. I don't know why they give you this big 4-foot cable when you could just go in from the right instead of going all the way around to the left and have a much better, you know, silkier throttle. So I would highly recommend doing that.
All right, fire in the hole.